Show. Today, we're diving into Daniel Kahneman's seminal work, Thinking, Fast and Slow. Kahneman himself hoped his book would enrich our vocabulary for what he calls intelligent gossip about the judgments and choices of others. Layla, this idea of intelligent gossip is quite intriguing. What did Kahneman mean by it, and why this focus on identifying errors?
It's a fantastic starting point, Eleanor. Kahneman argues that it's much easier and more enjoyable to spot mistakes in others than to see our own. By learning a richer vocabulary for these systematic errors, or biases, we can become better diagnosticians, much like a physician learns disease labels. This isn't about denigrating human intelligence. Most of our judgments are fine. But understanding these predictable patterns of error in others can eventually lead to a powerful form of self-criticism, more effective than any New Year's resolution. It's about raising the quality and content of those everyday water cooler conversations.
So it's about developing a more precise language for common cognitive pitfalls. The core of his theory, of course, revolves around two systems of thinking. Can you introduce us to System 1 and System 2?
Absolutely. Kahneman describes mental life through the metaphor of two agents. System 1 is our fast thinking. It operates automatically and quickly with little or no effort and no sense of voluntary control. Think about recognizing an angry face or knowing that 2 plus 2 equals 4. It just happens. System 2, on the other hand, is slow thinking. It allocates attention to effortful mental activities like complex computations, such as 17 times 24. Its operations are associated with agency, choice, and concentration. While we often identify with System 2, Kahneman posits that System 1 is actually the hero, effortlessly originating impressions and feelings that often guide System 2's deliberate choices.
And it sounds like System 2, despite being our conscious, reasoning self, can be surprisingly lazy. How does this lazy controller manifest in our decision-making, and what are the implications?
That's right. System 2 has a natural inclination towards the law of least effort. It prefers to coast in a low-effort mode. Kahneman illustrates this with the famous bat and ball problem. If a bat and ball costs $1.10 and the bat costs one more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Most people intuitively blurt out 10 cents, but the correct answer is 5 cents. System 2, in its laziness, accepts System 1's plausible but incorrect intuition without checking the math. This failure to engage effortful thought means we often endorse erroneous suggestions from System 1. This laziness also links to ego depletion, where exerting self-control or mental effort in one task reduces our capacity for self-control in subsequent tasks. For example, studies with parole judges showed approval rates drop to almost zero just before meal breaks. Tired and hungry judges defaulted to the easier deny option. So a busy or depleted System 2 is more prone to these errors.
That's a powerful point about how our mental state impacts decision-making. Kahneman also uses visual and cognitive illusions to highlight System 1's economy. Can System 2 truly overcome these illusions?
It's incredibly difficult. Take the Mueller-Lyer illusion. Even after measuring the lines and knowing they're equal, we still perceive one as longer. System 1 operates automatically and cannot be turned off. Similarly, cognitive illusions, like trusting a charming psychopath based on initial sympathy, are hard to resist. System 2 might know the correct rule, don't trust a patient with a history of failed treatments, but the intuitive feeling from System 1 remains. Continuous vigilance is impractical and tedious. The best we can do is learn to recognize situations where mistakes are likely and exert extra effort when the stakes are high. But System 1's influence is persistent.
It seems System 1 is constantly at work, even unconsciously. You mentioned its associative machine nature. How does this machine construct our reality, and how is it influenced by things like priming?
The associative machine of System 1 is astonishing. When you hear words like bananas vomit, your mind automatically connects them, evokes unpleasant images, and even triggers physical reactions like disgust. This is associative activation, where ideas trigger a spreading cascade of activity. Crucially, this often happens without conscious awareness. Priming effects demonstrate this beautifully. John Barg's Florida effect showed students walked slower after being primed with words related to old age, even though they were unaware of the theme. Or the Lady Macbeth effect, where thinking about a moral transgression makes people more inclined to buy soap. These trivial manipulations influence our actions and emotions profoundly, often without us knowing why. It suggests our conscious self is not always the autonomous author we believe it to be.
So, our environment can unconsciously guide our thoughts and behavior. This leads to the concept of cognitive ease. How does this dial in our mind work, and what are its consequences for our beliefs and judgments?
Cognitive ease is System 1's signal that things are going well. It ranges from easy to strained. When processing is fluent, due to clear fonts, repetition, or a good mood, we experience ease. This ease is linked to positive feelings, increased trust in our intuitions, and a tendency for superficial thinking. Conversely, cognitive strain, like reading complex language or being in a bad mood, makes us vigilant, suspicious, and less intuitive. This ease even creates illusions of remembering. Larry Jacoby's Becoming Famous Overnight experiment showed that seeing a name clearly makes it feel familiar, leading us to mistake it for a celebrity's name. Similarly, repetition makes falsehoods feel truer, a core insight for marketers and authoritarian regimes. The German bad font experiment even showed that inducing cognitive strain, surprisingly, improved performance on the cognitive reflection test because it mobilized System 2 to work harder.
That's counterintuitive. Making things harder can lead to better outcomes. This relationship between cognitive ease, mood, and intuition is also fascinating. What did the remote association test reveal about this?
The RAT, where you find a word linking 3 others, showed that people can feel a triad is coherent even before they know the solution. This is a faint signal of cognitive ease from System 1. The remarkable part is how mood influences this. Happy subjects were twice as accurate in their intuitive guesses, while unhappy subjects performed no better than chance. A good mood loosens System 2's control, making us more intuitive and creative, but also more gullible. A bad mood, conversely, makes us vigilant and analytical. It's an adaptive mechanism. When things are safe, relax. When there's a threat, be alert. Cognitive ease is both a cause and consequence of pleasant feelings.
Moving from feelings to our understanding of the world, System 1 seems to constantly build a model of what's normal. How does it react when things deviate from these norms, and how does it interpret causality?
System 1 is constantly maintaining and updating a model of our world, representing what's normal. Our capacity for surprise is the most sensitive indicator of this. There's active surprise when an expected event doesn't happen, and passive surprise when normal but not actively expected events occur. An initial surprise, like meeting an acquaintance in a remote location, can quickly make subsequent similar events feel normal, even if statistically improbable. This is norm theory. System 1 is also a causal inference machine. When you read Fred's parents arrived late, the caterers were expected soon, Fred was angry. You immediately infer the parents' lateness caused his anger. It creates coherent stories from fragments. Even with things like Michot's moving squares or the Hyder-Simmel film, we automatically perceive agents, intentions, and causality, even when it's just dots on a screen. This strong bias towards causal explanations makes it difficult for us to think statistically.
This causal bias seems to be a double-edged sword. It helps us make sense of the world, but can also lead to jumping to conclusions. Kahneman introduces YCIAT. What you see is all there is. How does this principle shape our judgments and lead to biases?
Wiciety is a cornerstone of System 1. It means our mind constructs the best possible story from the information available. And crucial, it doesn't account for information it doesn't have. So if we see A, B, C, and 12, 13, 14, the middle, B or 13, are identical, but our mind instantly resolves the ambiguity based on context, without recognizing the alternatives. Similarly, if asked, will Mindick be a good leader? She is intelligent and strong, we jump to yes without asking for more information. This leads to several biases: Overconfidence, because confidence comes from the coherence of the story, not its completeness. Framing effects, where wording like 90% fat-free versus 10% fat evokes different responses despite being logically equivalent. And base rate neglect, as in the Steve the Librarian problem, where a vivid personality description overrides statistical facts about population size. Wasiety is efficient, but makes us radically insensitive to the quality and quantity of information.
So we simplify complex questions by answering easier ones, often without realizing it. This ties into the affect heuristic, where our emotions guide our beliefs about the world.
Precisely. The affect heuristic is a classic example of substitution. Instead of answering, "What do I think about it?" System 1 answers, "How do I feel about it?" Paul Slovik's research showed that our emotional reactions to risks and benefits are linked. If you like a technology, you believe its benefits are high and risks low, even if there's no evidence for it. System 2 often acts as an apologist for System 1's emotions, searching for information that confirms existing beliefs rather than examining them critically. This emotional tail wags the rational dog, creating a tidier, simpler world in our heads.
Now, let's explore some specific biases. The law of small numbers seems to be a common pitfall. Can you explain this with the kidney cancer example?
The kidney cancer study revealed that counties with the lowest and highest incidence of cancer were both mostly rural, sparsely populated. Our System 1 immediately seeks a causal explanation for this pattern, perhaps linking it to clean living or poverty in rural areas. However, the true explanation is purely statistical. Small populations, like small samples, yield extreme results more often. A small county's population is like drawing only 4 marbles from an urn. Extreme outcomes, both high and low, are more likely in small samples. This is counterintuitive because we look for causes, not just random fluctuations. Similarly, the hot hand in basketball or the Sports Illustrated jinx are often attributed to skill or pressure when they're simply regression to the mean, amplified by our tendency to see patterns in randomness.
So, we misinterpret random variations as causal patterns. Another widespread bias is anchoring. How does this affect our judgments, even when the anchor is completely arbitrary?
Anchoring occurs when people consider a particular value for an unknown quantity before estimating that quantity, and their estimates stay close to that initial number. Kahneman and Tversky's rigged Wheel of Fortune experiment is a great example. Students' estimates of African nations in the UN were heavily influenced by whether the wheel stopped at 10 or 65, even though the number was obviously random. This happens through 2 mechanisms: System 2's deliberate adjustment from the anchor, which often ends prematurely, and System 1's priming effect, where the anchor selectively activates compatible memories. If asked about German temperature, a high anchor primes summer words, a low anchor primes winter words. Anchoring is a robust effect, influencing everything from real estate prices to legal damages, often without our conscious awareness that we're being influenced.
The availability heuristic also highlights how easily we can be swayed by what comes to mind first. How does this heuristic operate, and how do availability cascades impact public policy?
The availability heuristic judges frequency or probability by the ease with which instances come to mind. Salient events, dramatic media coverage, or personal experiences make instances more available, leading us to exaggerate their frequency. For example, spouses often overestimate their contribution to housework because their own efforts are more easily recalled. Paul Slovik's work showed estimates of causes of death are warped by media coverage, with rare but dramatic events like tornadoes perceived as more frequent than more common but less dramatic ones like asthma. Availability cascades, a term by Curran and Sunstein, describes self-sustaining chains where media reports amplify public concern, even for minor risks, leading to exaggerated fears and potentially misdirected public policy, like the Aller scare. Terrorism, unfortunately, effectively exploits this by creating vivid, accessible images of danger.
It's a stark reminder of how emotions and media exposure can distort our perception of risk. Now, the Tom Waugh problem clearly illustrates the representativeness heuristic and how it clashes with statistical reasoning.
The Tom W. problem describes a shy, tidy, detail-oriented student and asks people to rank the likelihood he studies various fields. Most people immediately rank him highest for computer science or library science, matching the stereotype, and lowest for fields like social work. They completely ignore the base rates, the actual proportion of students in each field. Even statistically trained individuals fell for this. System 1 generates an impression of similarity, and System 2, often lazy, endorses it. This is a sin of representativeness. We predict by how much A resembles B, ignoring prior probabilities and even the quality of evidence. Kahneman and Tversky found that asking people to think like a statistician, or even frowning, which activates System 2 vigilance, can reduce this bias. Bayesian reasoning, which combines prior beliefs with evidence, is the correct but often unintuitive approach.
And the Linda problem is another famous example demonstrating the conjunction fallacy, where less is more.
Yes, Linda, who is outspoken and concerned with social justice, is judged more likely to be a feminist bank teller than simply a bank teller. This violates basic logic because the set of feminist bank tellers is a subset of all bank tellers, making the conjunction necessarily less probable. But the description makes feminist bank teller more representative and plausible. Even statistically sophisticated students made this error. It's less is more because adding specific, descriptive details, even if it logically reduces probability, makes the story more compelling and seemingly more likely. Christopher Houssaye's dinnerware experiment showed a similar effect. A set of 24 intact dishes was valued less than a set of 40 that included some broken dishes because the average quality felt lower. These examples highlight how System 1 prioritizes coherence and plausibility over logical probability.
So our intuitions often fail when facing statistical facts, as with the kidney cancer and hot hand examples. The flight instructor story you mentioned earlier is a classic demonstration of regression to the mean and our tendency to invent causal stories for purely statistical phenomena.
It's a fantastic illustration. The flight instructor noticed that cadets performed worse after praise and better after criticism. He concluded that punishment works better. However, he was only praising exceptionally good flights and criticizing unusually bad ones. Both exceptional performances were likely just lucky and would naturally regress toward the mean on the next attempt, regardless of his feedback. Our minds, driven to find causes, invent a causal explanation where none exists. Success equals talent plus luck. If someone has an outstanding performance, they were likely talented and lucky. The next performance is likely to be good, but less extreme, as their luck will average out. This principle applies everywhere, from the Sports Illustrated jinx to business success. We resist this statistical reality because it lacks the satisfying causal story System 1 craves. Correcting for it requires conscious System 2 effort, like using a 4-step method for predictions, starting with a baseline, matching the evidence's intensity, estimating the correlation, and then adjusting the prediction back toward the mean. This moderates extreme forecasts, but it means we'll never have the "I thought so" satisfaction of perfectly calling an extreme success.
And this leads directly into overconfidence and various illusions. What is the illusion of understanding, and how does the narrative fallacy contribute to it?
The illusion of understanding is our belief that we comprehend the past, which then falsely implies we can predict and control the future. Nassim Taleb coined the narrative fallacy to describe how we construct flawed, simple, and concrete stories of the past, attributing more to talent and intention than to luck, and focusing on striking events rather than non-events. The Google success story, for example, feels perfectly logical in hindsight, making us believe its outcome was inevitable. But in reality, luck played a massive role, and countless other companies with good ideas failed. This coherent narrative makes us feel we knew it all along, a phenomenon known as hindsight bias. This bias makes it nearly impossible to evaluate past decisions objectively, as outcomes that seemed prudent in foresight can look irresponsibly negligent in hindsight, as with the 9/11 intelligence failure. It also drives decision makers towards bureaucratic solutions to avoid blame, fostering risk aversion.
So, hindsight distorts our perception of past predictability. This sounds linked to the illusion of validity and our overestimation of skill, especially in fields like finance.
Absolutely. My own experience in the Israeli army selecting officer candidates showed this illusion of validity. We confidently judged leadership potential from brief observations, despite knowing statistically that our predictions were almost useless. Our coherent impressions led to high subjective confidence, even when the evidence was weak. Similarly, in the stock market, individual investors consistently lose money because they believe they can beat the market, acting on useless ideas. Terry Odian's research showed that stocks individual traders sold outperformed the ones they bought. Most fund managers underperform the market, and year-to-year correlations of fund performance are near zero. It's mostly luck. This illusion of skill persists because professionals genuinely feel they are using high-level skills, and the financial culture reinforces this overconfidence. Philip Tetlock's study of political pundits further confirmed this. Experts are worse than chance at long-term forecasts, and the more famous they are, the more overconfident and flamboyant their predictions. The world is just inherently unpredictable in many domains, but we resist admitting our ignorance.
Given these deep-seated illusions, what are the chances of overcoming overconfident optimism? Is there any practical remedy?
Kahneman isn't optimistic about individual training. Subjective confidence is driven by story coherence, not evidence quality. However, organizations can do better. Gary Klein's pre-mortem is a brilliant idea. Before a major decision is finalized, a group imagines it's a year later and the plan was a disaster. They then write a brief history of that disaster. This overcomes groupthink and unleashes the imagination of knowledgeable individuals to identify potential threats that were initially overlooked. It's a partial remedy, but a powerful one, for reducing the damage of plans driven by wiseati and uncritical optimism.
Moving to the realm of choices, Kahneman starts by identifying Bernoulli's errors. What was the fundamental flaw in Bernoulli's expected utility theory?
Bernoulli's theory from the 18th century was brilliant. It proposed that people evaluate gambles not by their monetary value, but by the utility or psychological value of outcomes. And that utility has diminishing marginal value. A gain of $100 feels more significant to a poor person than a rich one. This explained risk aversion. However, his crucial error, which remained unquestioned for centuries due to theory-induced blindness, was that it ignored the reference point. For example, if Jack and Jill both have $5 million today, but Jack had $1 million yesterday and Jill had $9 million, Bernoulli's theory says they're equally happy. But in reality, Jack is elated and Jill is despondent. Our happiness is determined by changes relative to a reference point, not just absolute wealth. This became a central insight of prospect theory.
So prospect theory explicitly accounts for these reference points and offers a more descriptive model of human choice. What are its key principles?
Prospect theory, developed by Kahneman and Tversky, defines outcomes as gains and losses relative to a neutral reference point, not as states of wealth. It has three core features. First, reference dependence, where outcomes are evaluated as gains or losses from a current status quo or expectation. Second, diminishing sensitivity for both gains and losses. The psychological difference between $100 and $200 is greater than between $1,100 and $1,200. Third, and most crucial, loss aversion. Losses loom larger than corresponding gains. The pain of losing $100 is typically more intense than the pleasure of gaining $150. This means people are often risk-averse for gains, but surprisingly risk-seeking for losses, willing to gamble when facing sure losses. For instance, given a choice between a sure loss of $900 or a 90% chance to lose $1,000, most prefer the gamble. This behavior, observed in entrepreneurs facing dire straits, cannot be explained by Bernoulli's theory.
That asymmetry is really key, and the endowment effect seems to be a direct consequence of this loss aversion, where owning something increases its perceived value.
Precisely. Richard Thaler observed that his wine-loving professor friend wouldn't sell a bottle for $100, but wouldn't buy it for more than $35. The act of owning it made its value higher due to the pain of giving it up. This endowment effect is strongest for goods for use, like concert tickets or a coffee mug, which we value for their inherent enjoyment, rather than goods for exchange, like money or items routinely traded. In experiments, sellers demand about twice as much for a coffee mug as buyers are willing to pay, mirroring the loss aversion ratio. This also means we are strongly biased in favor of the status quo. Any change is perceived as a mix of gains and losses weigh more heavily. This explains why labor negotiations are so tough, with each side valuing their concessions more painfully than the other side values the gains.
The influence of negative experiences extends beyond financial decisions. Kahneman highlights negativity dominance, where bad events have a greater impact than good ones. How does this manifest in our lives?
Negativity dominance is deeply wired into our biology. Our brains respond more quickly to threats than opportunities. An angry face pops out of a crowd faster than a happy one. Paul Rosin's example of a single cockroach ruining a bowl of cherries, but a cherry doing nothing for a bowl of cockroaches, illustrates this perfectly. Bad is stronger than good is a consistent finding across many domains. Bad parents, bad feedback, even a single harsh word in a relationship have more impact than their positive counterparts. This also applies to goals. The aversion to not reaching a goal is stronger than the desire to exceed it. Professional golfers, for instance, putt more accurately to save par, avoiding a loss of bogey, than to achieve a birdie, which is a gain.
That's fascinating. Even professional athletes are unconsciously swayed by loss aversion. This brings us to the fourfold pattern of preferences under risk, which combines prospect theory's insights about value and decision weights.
The fourfold pattern is a core achievement of prospect theory. It shows how our attitudes to risk change depending on whether we face gains or losses and whether probabilities are high or low. For high probabilities of gains, like a 95% chance to win $10,000, people are risk-averse, accepting less to secure a sure gain. For low probabilities of gains, like lottery tickets, people are risk-seeking due to the possibility effect, overweighting the tiny chance of a huge win. For high probabilities of losses, like a 95% chance to lose $10,000, people are risk-seeking, preferring a gamble over a sure loss. This is where desperate gambles occur. And for low probabilities of losses, like buying insurance against rare disasters, people are risk-averse, willing to pay more than the expected value due to the certainty effect, overweighting the small risk to eliminate worry completely. This pattern makes our choices logically inconsistent, but psychologically predictable.
So, we're not always rational when it comes to probabilities, especially with rare events. This seems to be amplified by vividness and focusing attention.
Yes, our minds are not designed to get rare probabilities right. Terrorism, for instance, is effective not because the actual risk is high, but because it creates vivid images and emotions, leading to overestimation and overweighting of the minuscule probability. This is also seen in denominator neglect, where one child out of 100,000 disabled feels more threatening than a 0.001% risk because it evokes an individual image. This bias is strong, especially in choice from description, where probabilities are explicitly stated. However, in choice from experience, where we learn from repeated outcomes, rare events can actually be underweighted if they are not encountered often enough. We tend to form global impressions and emotional attitudes rather than rigorous statistical assessments.
And this leads to the idea of risk policies as a way to counteract these biases. What does Kahneman suggest here?
Given our inherent tendency towards narrow framing, evaluating each risky choice in isolation, Kahneman advocates for adopting risk policies. Instead of asking, should I take this specific gamble, we should ask, what is my general policy for small favorable gambles? This is broad framing. For example, always take the highest deductible on insurance, or never buy extended warranties. By aggregating many similar decisions, the statistical regularities emerge, and the emotional impact of individual losses is blunted. This is analogous to the outside view for planning. It helps mitigate both the excessive optimism of the planning fallacy and the exaggerated caution from loss aversion, leading to more rational long-term outcomes. Reducing the frequency with which we check our investments, for instance, can also help, as the pain of frequent small losses outweighs the pleasure of frequent small gains.
Beyond choices, Kahneman introduces the concept of two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. How do these two selves operate, and how do they sometimes conflict?
The experiencing self is the one that lives in the moment, feeling pleasure or pain. The remembering self is the one that keeps score, forms memories, and makes decisions about what was on the whole. Kahneman's colonoscopy study, where patients reported real-time pain, revealed a crucial insight: duration neglect and the peak-end rule. Retrospective ratings of pain were influenced primarily by the peak intensity and the pain level at the end, not the total duration. In the cold hand experiment, participants chose to repeat a longer, more painful trial over a shorter one because the longer one ended with slightly less pain, leaving a better memory. The remembering self's memory, which drives choices, often misrepresents the actual experience of the experiencing self, showing a less is more pattern where short, intense joy is preferred over longer, moderate happiness, or vice versa for pain.
So, we often optimize for our memories rather than our actual experiences. How does this remembering self shape our perception of life as a story and even our overall well-being?
Our remembering self constructs life as a story, focusing on significant events and memorable moments, often neglecting duration. Think of an opera. We care intensely about the climax and the ending, not the total length of the characters' lives. This duration neglect and peak end rule extend to how we evaluate our entire lives. Jen's story, a happy life with 5 slightly less happy years added at the end, was judged as worse overall by the remembering self. We also tend to prioritize the construction of memories in activities, like vacations, often at the expense of fully experiencing the moment. When asked about our life satisfaction, our remembering self uses available ideas and current mood as heuristics, leading to the focusing illusion. This means nothing in life is as important as you think it is when you're thinking about it. Whether it's the climate in California, a new car, or even paraplegia, we overestimate its long-term impact on our happiness because we focus attention on it when asked, neglecting that in daily life, attention shifts and adaptation occurs. This leads to miswanting, making bad choices because we mispredict our future feelings.
This framework really highlights the complexities of human cognition. In conclusion, Layla, what are the most crucial takeaways from Kahneman's work for improving our judgments and decisions, both individually and within organizations?
The central message is that while System 1 is the source of most of what we do right, System 1 isn't easily educable. My own intuitive thinking remains prone to biases. However, we can improve our metacognition, our ability to recognize situations where errors are likely, like identifying an anchor or a framing effect. This means slowing down and mobilizing System 2. While difficult for individuals, organizations are better equipped to implement systemic improvements. They can enforce checklists, employ reference class forecasting to counter the planning fallacy, and use pre-mortems to uncover potential disasters. Providing a richer vocabulary of biases fosters intelligent gossip, helping people watch out for each other. The goal is to move from decisions judged solely by outcomes to decisions judged by the process, understanding that while we can't be perfectly rational econs, we can certainly be more reasonable humans.